I'm not sure. We got that report, but it may take a little while to come in. Let's go across now to the United States again, because as we've been saying, today's events have been described as the worst attacks on American soil since Pearl Harbor. How will the American people react to all this? What effect will it have on them? Joining me now from our studios in Washington is Professor Robert Lieber of Georgetown University. Professor Lieber, James Rubin there was talking about the obvious anger that many Americans will feel. Do you think that is going to be, in essence, the sense that most people will have tonight?
Yes, I do, and I think there's something unique and very different about this terrorist wave of assaults. There have been other terrorist attacks in recent years that produce immediate anger, but then that fades. This is different. Nothing like this has occurred on American soil, at least for the continental U.S., in American history. It is no exaggeration to call it a terrorist Pearl Harbor, and I think the impact of shock on the American public today is comparable in some ways to 1963 when President Kennedy was assassinated.
Now, as you were speaking there, Professor Lieber, we're taking some new pictures coming to us from the streets of New York, which are showing, well, they're very, very extremely distressing scenes. They're showing some of the injured being put into ambulances. We have seen scenes which look like the devastation caused in World War II. Terrible scenes from this most sophisticated of all world cities. What do you think, as these pictures go round America tonight, and as people begin to think about this, it settles in, as you said, with the assassination of President Kennedy, what will they be demanding from their political leaders?
Well, I think you will see a sense of both anger and determination. Over the decades, America's adversaries have consistently underestimated the purpose and resolve of the United States. But I think you've found historically that when the United States has found its most vital interests threatened or have been attacked, the country has responded with remarkable resolve. Sometimes our politics are not very pretty or high level, but on an occasion like this, I think you're going to find that the President, the Congress, and the American people will find ways to support decisive action on a long-term basis in responding to this act of war.
Professor Lieber, many parallels have been made with Pearl Harbor through the day, this terrible surprise attack that nobody was expecting. Of course, the difference is we knew who did it in Pearl Harbor. We don't know who the enemy is. How much more difficult is that to come to terms with?
Well, it's risky to speculate in the middle of events. One thing I think is not unreasonable to say, though, is that an action of this sort would have required a very extensive terrorist network and support, almost certainly by a state, not just a bunch of bearded guys with Kalashnikovs, to hijack at least 4 planes at the same time, to have terrorists, pilots who could fly large passenger aircraft, to coordinate actions in New York and Washington, to resolve on the timing, to keep it secret, to have concealed identities and whatnot. This is not a small operation. There is bound to be, almost certainly, the hand of a country behind this, and I think sooner or later the details will emerge. When they do, I don't think you're going to find something like an antiseptic strike with Tomahawk missiles, but something much more sustained, intense, and long-term.
Professor Lieber, again, as you're talking, news is continuing to come in, as you can imagine. We're now being told that yet another enormous building in New York has collapsed. It is the 47-story Salomon Brothers building, which was situated very close to the World Trade Center, right there in this financial capital. Professor Lieber, the implications of what you are saying is that this will absolutely be seen as an act of war by the ordinary people of the United States. Never mind the fact the military is on alert, ordinary folk will feel this is an act of war.
Absolutely. I mean, I think in terms of coherent policy, during the last decade, the United States has not had any kind of overarching sense of threat of the sort that it had during World War II or the Cold War. That's changed. When at the level of the man on the street or the woman on the street, they sense something with a very real, immediate, and durable impact, then you've got an entirely different situation. This reverberates around the country, not just in New York or Washington. There are hundreds of people who will have lost friends and relatives in California. Those planes were destined for San Francisco and Los Angeles. There are people across the country who will be immediately affected, and the symbolism of this is extraordinary. So I think the long-term impacts on policy are very great, and we will have crossed a watershed with these terrible assaults of this morning.
Professor Lieber, thank you very much for joining us from Washington.
Thank you.
And people are still being rescued from ruined buildings in New York. Here's the experience of some of the people caught up in the attacks.
The plaza we were on.
It was complete dark, there is no light. So, thank God somebody with little light came up, because we couldn't even see what's happening. We all, with dust and debris. And
how'd you get out?
Well, the firefighter, somebody with little light came eventually, and we were following him.
And go to.
What did you do? I'm sorry.
The police officer told everybody to form a human chain, and we held on to each other, and he flashed the light, and he directed us to Building 5, and we went out Building 5.
Did you see people bleeding, and what did you see?
Oh, everybody could see. You want blood? Here's blood. Everybody's bleeding. People are laying all over the floor. It's horrible. And I was there the first time, and this is twice.
Okay, we were standing in front of the Soho Grand Hotel, and the doorman, I went to fire alarm company, the doorman goes to me, wow, I never seen a plane flying so low. And we looked out at it, all of a sudden, boom, it seemed like it wasn't even real. And we came running over here closer to the place, and all of a sudden we saw the other explosion. I don't know. That's all I saw. I saw a couple of people jumping out of the other building. I seen 2 or 3 people jump out of the building.
Let's just briefly bring you up to date and see if we can run some of those latest pictures which are coming in from New York. We're told that yet another building has now collapsed at the south end of Manhattan near the World Trade Center. It was the 47-story Salomon Brothers building next to the World Trade Center. There are still fears that even more buildings could actually collapse. The White House is saying now that President Bush will address the nation tonight. No time has been given, but we understand the president is on his way back to the White House after having gone to Nebraska to Strategic Air Command, which was the command center where, in the event of war, it would be expected that the war would have been run by the president and his staff. And of course, many Americans are indeed comparing today's events to the Japanese surprise attack on Pearl Harbor 60 years ago. At that time, in 1941, President Roosevelt said it was a day which would live in infamy. For most Americans, today is not so different. From this BBC News 24 special program, goodbye.